everybody, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the Estes Pro Series 2 Star Orbiter kit. This is a mid-power kit, and technically this can fly on anything from a C11 up through a G80, but Estes only designed this for use with up to about an F16. If you want to use the really high power mid-power motors, I suggest using an upgrade, and that's what I've got here as well. So I'm going to put on plywood fins and heavier cardboard centering rings. These are both from R.E.A.R. And then I'm going to add on a nylon parachute from Apogee Components. So as with everything, let's go ahead and open up the kit and we'll make sure that we have everything ready to go. Alright, let's open up the instructions here. Okay, and just check our parts list. So motor mount tube there, two body tubes, one of which is slotted for the fins. Okay, our fin material, 1/8 inch balsa. Alright, under here we've got our water slide decals. Okay, we've got a coupler and a nose cone centering rings. And then in the small parts package here, we've got the parachute, elastic shock cord, 1/4 inch launch lugs, screw-on retaining ring, which I really love these things. And then I think that is it. Yep, so we have all of our parts here, and I'm going to put most of this away and we will get started. Our first task is to build the motor mount, and this is one of the places we're going to do an upgrade. So instead of using the stock rings that we have here, I'm going to set those aside. We'll use them in some other model. Alright, here I'm going to use the heavier rings from R.E.A.R. Okay, and we need to make some measurements here. So I'm going to go ahead and mark one end of my engine mount tube as aft, so I don't get that confused later on. So from the aft end, we need to make a mark at 1.3 centimeters, or 1/2 inch. Right there. And then another mark at 11.4, or 4.5 inches. Right there. And then one more mark up at 19.1 centimeters. Alright, or 7.5 inches. Okay, now we're going to dry fit these rings on. Alright, now these are considerably thicker in terms of their actual ring depth here than the stock ones are, so we need to make sure that we don't run into any problems, and we want to be consistent in which way we orient these to the marks. So I'm always going to have our mark facing toward the aft end here. Oh, there's my aft. Alright, so we'll start with the aft ring, find that mark, it's going to go there. And the reason for that is the engine retainer slides on over this point here. Okay, and we're going to find our middle mark, or slightly off middle. Okay, so again, aft side of the ring, and then our forward one, right there. Now for this forward ring, I'm going to take this back off for a minute, and I'm going to cut a notch in it because I'm going to add a Kevlar shock cord to replace the stock elastic one. And so I'm just going to cut a little notch in here to give me enough room to thread that through. Okay, need some more there. Alright, and that should be good enough there. Now for the shock cord, I'm using some 100-pound test, which means it has a working load of 20 pounds, which should be more than enough. Even though this is a long and it's a mid-power rocket, it's very lightweight. If you want something a little thicker, you could go with like a 220-pound test if you wanted. But this keeps us very light. Now the overall rule of thumb for using Kevlar shock cords on long, thin rockets is you want a minimum of 3 times the rocket length. So this has a length of 45.2 inches or about 115 centimeters. Alright, so I would need at least 345 centimeters or 3.45 meters. And just to be safe, I'm going to put 4 meters of this on. So I'm going to go quickly measure that out and come back. So here I have cut to 4 meters my Kevlar shock cord. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put that through my ring here and into that notch to begin with. And I'm just going to slide that back on and down to my mark there. Alright, now I'm going to get ready to glue this on. So I'm just going to move these rings forward a little bit to start with. Okay, and use white glue or wood glue for this. Okay, I'm just going to run a bead all the way around there. And then I'm going to slide my ring back up to the mark. Now, especially on this aft one, you want to make a nice smooth fillet here, because the retainer is going to be mounted snug up against that ring or close to it, so we don't want a lot of stuff in the way. And my excess glue here I'll just put on the back side. Okay, I'm going to move on to the middle ring. Do the same thing. Now we'll come back and make actual fillets on the other sides of these rings as well. Right, we'll move that back into place. Now before I completely leave this as is, I do want to make sure that these thicker rings are not going to interfere with the fin slots. And they don't. Okay, but it's something worth checking. Alright, and I'm going to smooth that one in. Okay, now for this one, before we glue it, I'm going to tie that shock cord into place. Okay, so here I'm just going to move this around like such, and go ahead and give yourself a little bit of play in the line there. Okay, and then I'm just going to make an overhand knot into the Kevlar there. Okay, and then I'm going to cinch that down. And this is mainly just to keep it in place while we're gluing. Okay, now here I'm going to, like I did with the others, I'm going to move my ring just a little bit there. Okay, and now I'm going to put a really heavy bead of glue all the way around this. Because we're actually going to embed all of that Kevlar line into the glue. Okay, so now I can just run this around. Okay, and just thoroughly embed that there. Do try and keep the glue off the top side. Alright, and then I'm going to go ahead and slide that back into position. Alright, and then again, excess glue can go on the opposite side. And now we'll go through and finish those fillets there. So especially if you're planning on using some high thrust engines, you want this well glued and locked down. so you don't end up flying the engine mount through the rocket. Okay, now this needs to completely dry before we try putting it up inside the tube itself. And so while we're waiting for that to dry, we'll do a few other tasks here. While we're waiting for the glue on the engine mount to dry, we can go ahead and put on the line for the launch lugs here. Alright, so for that, simply find a point halfway between two of the slots there. You can either measure that with a flexible tape or just kind of guesstimate it here. Okay, and then take this over to a door frame or similar thing and just extend this line all the way up. And I'm going to do that off camera and come back. Here I have my line drawn for the launch lugs. Now I'm also going to scoot ahead here for just a moment. Okay, so our launch lugs are going to be mounted flush with the aft end, and then the forward one is going to be at 12 inches or 30.5 centimeters from the aft end. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that while I've got it here. And we'll just do this one in inches because it's easier with this ruler. Alright, so one there, and then the other one will be back here. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of sandpaper. It doesn't really matter what grit. And I'm just going to roughen those areas a little bit so that when we go to glue the launch lugs on, it'll give it a better adhering surface. Okay, and you don't need to do much, just a few strokes there. While we're waiting for the engine mount to dry, we can go ahead and prepare the fins. Now these are the plywood fins from Semrock that we're upgrading the balsa fins with. Now since these are plywood, they don't have the deep grain that balsa does, but it also means it's going to be a lot harder to sand these. Also it means that shaping the fins into whatever version of an airfoil you like will also take a bit longer. But it does mean if you want to go for the full airfoil effect and round the front and taper the back, these are going to be a lot stronger than if you would do the same thing with balsa fins. Now to speed things up, I am going to use a rotary tool to do the initial sanding here, and then hand sand the rest, the final bit, to get everything nice and even. Now if you're not used to doing this with a rotary tool like a Dremel, you might want to practice on some scrap wood first, because it's really easy to go too far and end up ruining the fins. So I'm going to go off camera and do my fin shaping and then come back. Alright, I've done my initial sanding to impart a taper to the leading edge, and that's all I'm going to do with this. I'm not going to do a full airfoil on it. Now I'm going to take my 150 grit sandpaper and smooth that out. Alright, and then on the trailing edge here, I'm just going to sand that square. And I'm just going to do enough to get that soot off from the laser cutting process. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing with the other two fins off camera. Alright, I've finished the shaping of my airfoils here. And now what I'm going to do is, looks like I need a little more face sanding there. I sanded the faces of all of these. It looks like I missed this one. So we'll just do that quickly here. Alright, Now, depending on your preference, you could just sand these with progressively finer sandpaper, make them nice and smooth, and mount them as is. You could add some sanding sealer to this, sand that down, that'll give you a smooth fin as well. I'm actually going to treat this with a fillable, sandable primer before I actually mount them to the Rocket, and I'll probably give them another coat after they're mounted, but it just helps fill in the grain here. So any of those three treatments will give you a finer grain and a smoother fin once it's finished. So I'm going to take this off camera, give it a coat of primer or two, and then we'll come back, and by then we should be pretty close to being ready to put in the motor mount. The glue on my motor mount is dry, and we are ready to put this up inside the body tube. Now the first thing I'm going to do is take my shock cord here, find the other end of it. All right, and I'm going to thread that down through so that it comes out the aft end. And this is to keep from getting the shock cord into the glue that we'll use to mount the motor mount. Alright, so I'm going to pull that all the way through like that. Alright, it's all hanging out the aft end of the motor mount. Okay, now I'm just going to do a dry fit here. Okay. Alright, now I've built several star orbiters, and at least on two of them I have screwed up this part. So, two things that you can learn from me. One is don't put the glue in like this, okay? Because what they're doing is have you put 3 rings of glue inside of there and then shove this in. What's going to happen is one of two things. Either this is going to go in and all of the glue on the aft and the middle rings is going to get shoved forward by that centering ring, and so there won't be anything left down here. Or by the time you get up to about that mid-centering ring, the paper on the centering ring has expanded and it won't go in any farther. So I'm going to show you an alternative way to glue this in. The other thing is that this is indicating this type of a fit, okay, where it should be, the aft centering ring should be flush with the body tube, or I like to do it just a little bit inside, just a millimeter or two there, and I'll show you why here in a little bit. It does not mean this goes all the way in, so the motor mount tube should be sticking out, not flush with the body tube. And I've done that twice, and it always means I have to finagle things later on. So learn from my mistakes and do it that way. Okay, if it's a little bit tight trying to get this in, one of the first things you can do is take your nose cone and use it kind of like a mandrel to stretch that open just a little bit. Don't go too far, you just don't want to rip the body tube. It'll just give a little bit bigger opening there, and it means it'll slide in a little quicker that way. Okay. Now if you are binding, then take some fine sandpaper and just sand down each of the rings a little bit until you get a good fit. Alright, now when this is inside like this, alright, we want glue around this part. Now I'm going to use one of my applicators here. You can also use a dowel or just a scrap piece of balsa or something. Alright, and the length of this is farther than my applicator can go, but that's okay because this forward ring is going to push through that glue and push it forward to make its own little fillet there. We're actually not going to have any ring of glue for that middle ring because, as I said here, when you push that in, all the glue is going to be in front of here, and this usually doesn't get very much, if any. Alright, and then we'll be able to apply an aft ring of glue here in just a moment that will take care of this. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my glue here. Alright, I'm going to get a nice big glob of glue on my applicator. Alright, I'm going to stick that up without touching the sides till I get as far as I can reach. Alright, and I'm just going to rotate that around inside there. I'm going to get some more glue. Okay, and do that again. Getting that as far as I can reach with that applicator is still going to be below where that ring is. Alright, now I'm going to insert this, okay, but just until about there. So I've got about half the motor mount hanging out here yet. And now I'm going to apply glue right inside the body tube. Alright, now you're going to get a little bit on the motor mount doing this. It's not going to hurt anything. It'll add a negligible amount of weight to it. The important thing is that you're getting it on the inside of that body tube. Okay. Now if you want to get at least the visible stuff off, just wipe that off there. Alright, now I'm going to push this in until this is flush. Alright, and I could feel that first ring of glue. And as I said, I like to have mine just a few millimeters in there. Alright, and it is starting to grab already. Just like that, and let's see if I can get just a little bit further. There we go. Okay. Now the reason I like to have that little lip there is that later on when we put the retaining ring on here, that's going to slide here, okay, and should be flush with the end of the motor mount, and we're going to have just a little bit of gap there. This will be applied with epoxy, and the excess epoxy is going to flow down onto that ring and fill in as a fillet that little ridged area there. Okay, so I'm actually expecting to do it that way. I'm going to take this back off so I don't accidentally glue it too early. Okay, and I'm going to let this completely dry before we come back to it. Here's one of the fins with the primer. It kind of blends right into my mat here. Now you can still see grain in here, and what I'm going to do now is sand this so that the high spots will be bare again, but the low spots in the grain will still be full of the primer. And then we'll go back and do another coating of primer on that. Here I'm using 220 grit sandpaper. Now, something to be aware of is that this stuff does clog up sandpaper fairly quickly, so you're going to want to have more handy. So you can see here where the deeper areas still have the primer in there. I'm going to go ahead and do my leading edge here. Okay, I'll go ahead and clean off that root edge there. Okay, now if you want, you can add another coat of primer to this and sand it once more. I probably will wait and mount the fins first and then add another coating of primer so that it also helps fill in any little imperfections on the fillets and things like that. Alright, so I need to do the other 2 fins off camera, and then when I come back those will be done and ready to be mounted to the rocket. All of my fins have been sanded now, and we're ready to put these on. And so here we're just going to use some wood glue and put on not overly thick but uniform bead of glue here on the root edges. Okay, and all of these will be coming in contact with the rocket one way or another. So this tab will go into contact with the motor mount tube down there, and then the upper parts of the root edge there will be in contact with the body tube. And the nice thing about these slots is it helps line these up really nicely. Okay, so they're going to be straight that way, and the only thing you really have to do is make sure that the fin is perpendicular. Okay, you can use fin alignment guides with these to give you a little extra straightness if you like. Oops. Okay, now I need to check that again. Okay, and I'm going to let that dry for at least 5 minutes. If you're using white glue, go for at least 10. But then we can go around and do the other 2 fins in sequence. I'm going to do that off camera and then return. My fins are all glued into place and nice and straight there. So next I'm going to add the launch lugs. Here I'm going to use a stand so that I can just keep these nice and horizontal. Now we sanded the body tube here where we were going to put these, and now I'm going to do the same thing for the launch lugs themselves. So I'm just going to take the launch lug here and just roughen up a little bit in a line. I'll do the same thing with the other one here. Okay, and then we can add just a little bit of glue there. Okay, I'll place that on my line. Okay, and this one's going to be flush with the aft end. Okay, and then we've got the other one that we're going to put at 12 inches from the aft end. Okay, so that one's going to go here. Okay, and now I'm going to take and sight down the body tube, and so my launch lugs should all be straight with reference to the line there, and also to each other. And that all looks pretty good. Okay, so we'll let the launch lugs dry for a little while. And the glue on my fins is mostly dry enough to handle. And so now we're going to put the fillets on the fins and on the launch lugs. And you can actually do all of these at the same time as long as you keep the rocket horizontal. And so I'm just going to run a bead of glue along the base of each fin. And I'll usually do this 2 facing fins at a time. And then just take a finger, smooth that in, and then wipe off the excess. Okay, we'll come back to that launch lug when we get the fins done. Alright, so again, glue. Now if you like to have really built up fillets so it kind of blends into the body tube, you can do that, but I recommend doing it in several layers, not in one big heavy layer of glue. Because inevitably it's going to dry unevenly or sag or generate bubbles, all sorts of other things that just make the whole process harder in the long run. And what can be easier if you want more built up fillets is once you've got a fillet of glue down and that dries, then you can overlay that with wood filler or contour putty or even epoxy putty. Alright, so now we'll do the launch lugs here. Alright, and now I'm going to let this dry horizontally until that glue is completely dry. Something else we can do while we're waiting for the fillets to dry is go ahead and prep the nose cone. And so here you may have a little bit of flash stuck in that eyelet, and usually it comes out fairly easily, so you can just cut that out with your hobby knife. Okay, now this nose cone is made in two halves, so there's a seam here and one opposite that. Now, depending on how prominent it is, you may or may not want to do anything about it. So if you do, one of the things you can do is first of all sand this with some 150 grit sandpaper, especially over the seam. Okay, and then I'm going to sand all the rest of it so it's even. Okay, and then you can just wipe that down with a moist rag or paper towel. I'm using just a little bit of rubbing alcohol here on some tissues, just so you can get that dust off and see better. Okay, so what I've done is that has knocked down the seam here, but part of the seam actually goes inside, so there's a little bit of a groove there. It's not very noticeable. If we look on the other side, it's barely noticeable there at all. So the next thing you can do is move to 220 grit sandpaper here and sand the whole thing. Alright, and then once again we'll go ahead and just wipe this down, get the dust off. Alright, now if we look at it, my groove is almost completely gone there, and I think if we use some of the filling sandable primer on this, it'll be completely gone. Okay, and even if you don't have that noticeable groove there, it's a good idea to use some very fine sandpaper to sand the nose cone, as it will make your paint adhere better. Okay, so I can set this aside. I'll probably go ahead and put some primer on it while I'm waiting for everything else. Now, I may not get around to painting this whole rocket for this video just because we're at the start of winter here and the weather's kind of unpredictable. Right now it's really windy. While we're still waiting for the fillets to dry, we can go ahead and prep the parachute. Now, as I mentioned, I'm upgrading the stock parachute to a nylon one here. And this is produced by Apogee Components. They make really lightweight nylon parachutes. I really like their chutes here. They're about as thin as you can get and still retain some strength. And they come pre-assembled. Alright, so I'm just going to open this up. Now, something I'm adding to this is a snap swivel here, and you can get this in the fishing department of most sporting goods and department stores. Basically, you just need one that's big enough that the snap part will go around the eyelet on your nose cone, and the swivel part here on its eyelet is big enough to accommodate the shroud lines. So here I'm going to isolate all my shroud lines here so we're not tangled up. Okay, so we've got one going across the middle and then one on either side of that. And so I'm going to take all those first of all and just hook them on my finger here. And now I'm going to grab the center of the parachute with my other hand. Okay, and now I'm just going to pull this taut, and then I'm going to change the relative lengths of my shroud lines here by just pulling on one or another until we get all of these corners at roughly the same spot. Okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and align those corners there and then pull. Alright, so now I've got that all taut, and over here now I'm not going to let this go, so either one hand or the other is going to be holding these lines so that they don't change position on me. Okay, I'm going to scooch those down so that all those loops come together, and I'm going to pass all 3 loops of nylon shock cord through my eyelet here. Okay, it's got a little bit tight. You get that one through too. Now it may be that I'll need a little bit bigger snap swivel. We'll see how I do here. Yep, I'm going to get a little bit bigger one. Alright, so this is the next size bigger here. It's just a little bit, but it's got a definitely larger diameter on the eyelet there. So now we can pass that through very easily. Alright, so now I've got that hanging down, and I'm going to pass that entire snap swivel through the loops, pull the loops back on themselves, so now I've got it like this, and now I'm just going to let those tighten up and form a knot right there. Okay, now I come back here, make sure everything's straight. That's good enough. Now here, the nylon's going to be kind of slippery, and it's going to try and unknot itself. And there are a couple of things you can do. You can either put a little dab of white or wood glue there on the knot to hold it in place, or something I like to do is use a little bit of shrink wrap tubing. So here's my shrink wrap tubing, and you can get this at most hardware stores in the electrical department. And we just need something that's big enough to fit over this. In fact, I could probably use some smaller ones, and in that case what I would do is pass the shrink wrap onto the shroud lines before I put the snap swivel on. Alright, but we're going to go with this. Okay, and then you can take a hair dryer or just a lighter like this, put it on low flame, and then just gently heat that, being careful not to burn your finger or melt the shroud lines. Okay, so now that'll lock those shroud lines in place around the eyelet there. You want to make sure you don't get it down so far that it interferes with the swivel mechanism here. Alright, but the nice thing about this is that if you decide you need to change something else, you can just cut this off, readjust your shroud lines, and then if you want, put a new piece on. Whereas if we glue it, it's a little bit harder to make adjustments later on. So this is ready to go, and we'll just put this aside until the final assembly, where we'll simply clip this onto the nose cone. The fillets on the fins are dry, and they're looking pretty good. I don't see any bubbles or globs there. But these are minimum fillets. Okay, so if you would like to have a built-up fillet that will help reduce interference drag, You can do that with glue, or you can do that with epoxy putty, or with contour putty, or even with wood filler, and just build those up from there. But my launch lug fillets there, they've got some bubbles in there. And so to treat that, I'm going to use some contour putty here. And this is kind of like wood filler, except it's got an alcohol base and it's got a much finer fill to it. And it dries fairly quickly. It's alcohol based. And so what I'm going to do here is get basically a popsicle stick like this and use that to shape things. Okay, so I'm going to take this filler here and I'm simply going to apply it over the glue fillets. All right, and you can do this with your finger. It's not toxic. This is going to give me a little bit deeper fillet though than when I do it with my finger. Okay, and you can shave away excess after it dries. It sands really well. Okay, I can turn this over. You do have to work this really quickly though, because it does dry fast. It'll start to crack and such when you work it if you don't do it right away. Okay, and I'll just cut that stuff off later. I'm going to do the same thing up on the forward launch lug here. Okay, and I'll just let this dry, and when it's dry I'll go ahead and sand that down. I probably won't show the sanding on camera here because sanding is really boring to watch, so I don't want to have any more of it than I need. And as I said, if you like the built-up fillets on the fins, do it just like I did on my launch lugs there. Just run a bead of the filler in there and then take a popsicle stick or other tool or even your finger to smooth that in. Now, in order to get around the inclement weather that we've been having, instead of trying to paint the entire rocket at once, I painted it in sections. And the lower part of the rocket with the fins and such is black. And so the decals will not show up on that. So all of my decals are going to go on the upper body tube here. And I can do that without having to have the body tube installed. So I've got a basin of just room temperature water here. Now this part is optional. This is something I saw on one of Tim Van Milligan's videos over on the Apogee Components site. And this is just take a little bit of white glue, only about that much, and you just mix that into the water. And this is supposed to help keep your decals from peeling up again. So we'll just kind of stir all that in there. Alright, so the first thing to do here is just cut these out. And you can leave a little bit of a border on them. Both of the checkered decals are meant to be wraps, so they'll go all the way around the tube. Now if you had a rocket where you do the entire tube the same color, or both tubes are a fairly light color, this one here can go toward the aft end, and you can actually cover up the seam between the two body tubes using this decal. I'm just going to push it, place it along one edge there. Alright, and we're just going to put that whole thing into the water and let it saturate the paper. And boy, there's nothing like watching a decal soak. It's almost as much fun as watching someone sand. So I'll go ahead and cut this next one out. Alright, this one's also a wrap, and it's going to go along the upper edge of the body tube. Alright, I'm going to help this along a little bit. Okay, and now we just want to gently move it here using our fingers and thumbs, just so it starts to slide. It's almost there. And don't force it, because we don't want to rip the decal, which can be a problem with large decals like that. Okay, so that side's very loose. It's still sticking in the middle there. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is going to go down here. Alright, I want to place it fairly close to where I actually want it to be. Okay, and I'm going to straighten it as it comes out. So if it looks like it's going a little crooked on me, I can just pull a little bit of tension on it there. And you can actually just pull this as you go along, and it'll help straighten it out. We're trying to avoid bubbles and crinkles and such. Alright, so those two should overlap. Now if I just, again, push a little bit of tension on there until they do line up. And then once we've got them where we want them, then you can blot this. And just do this gently. If you put pressure on it, you'll tear them. And you can see in some cases that color is coming off. And try to avoid that. Okay, so there's one. Okay, we're going to do the same thing with this one. I'm going to let it speed up a little bit here. Usually it takes 15 to 20 minutes of full soaking like this. Not minutes, seconds. 15 to 20 minutes will have dissolved. Alright. So the same thing here. And we're just going to gently pull the paper out from under it. It's trying to get a crinkle down the middle of it. Hopefully we can avoid here. There we go. Okay, and once again we're just going to blot this out. Get little crinkles out of there. Okay. Alright, then we've got two left. Alright, we've got our little Estes logo here. Now I'll put this one on last. I want to see where the other ones end up. Alright, this one, a little bit of a trouble here. It doesn't quite fit in my basin. I'll stand it on its edge. Alright, let's see if we can move. Okay, so this one's just going to go along the length of the body tube here. Now, since we are doing this before we do the final assembly, you will want to make note of where this is in relation to your launch lugs, because most people don't want it on the same side as the launch lugs. Alright, now try and guesstimate how straight this is. I think I got it pretty close. Alright, then our final decal here is the Estes logo. I'm just going to stick that in there. Little pieces of decal floating off there. Okay, and I think on mine I'm just going to put it right here next to the Star Orbiter title. Oh! Okay, yep, I ripped it there. Alright, now, if we're lucky here, we can just kind of scoot things around. We'll just reattach the broken piece, just like that. And I'm very carefully going to blot this. I had too much tension on it there. Okay, and I'll just let this dry. You can put a clear coat over this. Do it very carefully. I have yet to find a brand of clear coat that is foolproof. Let this dry for at least 48 hours before you try and clear coat it, and then use very, very light coats multiple times. All right, when we come back, we'll attach everything together. This is the aft section of my rocket. It's been painted. Don't look too close. It's not the best paint job I've ever done. But we're going to put the motor retainer on here. And we're going to need some epoxy, which I've made up a small amount of 5-minute epoxy here. Okay, and it's a good idea to wear gloves with this because repeated exposure to epoxy can cause allergic-like reactions. It's also very sticky. Alright, so we're just going to apply this to the outer surface here of our engine mount tube. And it doesn't take a lot. I've made about 1 gram of total amount of epoxy here. Alright, and then we're going to take this part here. Alright, so the male part of the retainer here, and the edge that has the little notches in it, that's going to go toward the rocket. So I'm just going to slide that on. Kind of twist it as it goes to distribute the epoxy evenly. Alright, and that will cure in about 5 minutes. Now I'm going to attach the forward tube to the aft tube, and for that we're going to need the tube coupler here, and we need to measure halfway down its length. So this is 3 inches long here. So we're just going to make a mark at 1.5 inches. And I'm going to start with the upper body tube. It doesn't matter really which one you do. So for this, you use white glue or wood glue. And we're just going to run a ring of glue just inside the body tube here. Now make sure you get your body tube oriented the way you want it. Okay, so here's my aft end of my rocket. I'm going to want mine like this. Okay, so we'll put glue in this end. Right. But because we have our Kevlar shock cord, we can't tell one end from another by looking at where the shock cord is. Right, and now I'm just going to slide this in. Okay, and kind of use one motion here. Give it a little twist and insert that to the mark we had there. Okay, and then we can do the same thing with the aft body tube. Alright, now notice here I've pulled my shock cord all the way out of the aft end so that it does not accidentally get in the glue up there. Okay, now I also want to know where my launch lug is because I want the star orbiter decal to face away from it. Okay, so now I'm just going to bring that together. And you can't see the whole thing, but I'm trying to align this with the fin that's opposite the launch lug there. Alright, so here's a pass by here, so we got that, and there's our fin. Alright, I'm going to let that glue dry before we attach the shock cord and parachute to the nose cone. The epoxy has cured on the motor retainer and the glue inside the coupler has dried. And now I've passed the shock cord all the way back through the rocket so it's coming out the front end again. And now all we have to do is attach the nose cone. Here's my painted nose cone. And now we'll just take the end of the shock cord, pass that through the eyelet, tie a double knot or 2 half hitches into that. Okay, cinch that down really well. And then we're going to cut that off at about 1/2 centimeter, around 1/4 inch there, just so it doesn't get caught between the shoulder and the body tube up here. And I'm just going to take a little bit of super glue and put a little bit on that knot so it doesn't come undone, and a little bit on that frayed end there so it does not continue to fray. Alright, then I'm going to accelerate that a bit just by taking a tissue here and moistening it with alcohol and just touching that to that. Okay. And then finally, all we need to do is attach the parachute, okay, which we had prepared earlier. So that clips on just like that. Alright, and we are done. I hope you had a good time building this rocket. Have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.